Well, here we are, yet again. Me, Andy Swindler,
And me, Brendan McNamara.
the co-host of Totally Classic, where we explore controversial topics, many of which we don't necessarily agree on ourselves, and yet we can come together and have robust debate and dialogue and still love each other at the end. That's the goal of every episode, to
That's
still love each
yeah.
other.
To start and end in love. That's it. Yeah. Show the world this is very not only possible, it's actually relatively easy.
Yeah. So I was taking my stepdaughter to school this morning, and it's just a few days back to school, and I was never great at getting to school on time, as you might imagine.
I can attest to that anecdotally.
And you know, I since I've only been her stepdad for about a year, I can't take full credit for all of her habits. And yet here we were running late, and it really bugs me to be late. That may generally be true, but it's in this case, when she's late, it's the difference between walking to school, which maybe takes 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the pace, or driving 4 blocks.
Oh yeah.
Now, I used to have a Prius for 18 years, and hybrids aren't the end all be all. I don't think we have a perfect solution to clean energy and all that.
Gosh, no.
And yet, my brother was telling me there's a report that looks at the cradle to grave life cycle of cars, and
Yeah.
hybrids in many cases do better than electric cars, cradle to grave, just with
Yeah.
all the other stuff that goes into the batteries and production, and et cetera,
Yeah.
and where the electricity comes from and all that. So I had this Prius for 18 years, and then it got really dramatically totaled about a year ago, in a year and a half ago, in a very James Bond style. So I was just actually at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago at the James Bond exhibit,
Oh,
and
hilarious.
they had like a bunch of the cars there, and
Yeah.
one of the early Aston Martins had these little spikes that would come out of the center of the wheel and then
Hmm.
trash like trash the
Yeah.
car next to you on the road.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then later it was upgraded to a laser, but that's almost exactly what happened to me, because our car lost control driving down. My car was parked in front of my house in Chicago on a quiet
Oh
neighborhood
no.
street with a bunch of other cars. This other car lost a wheel somehow, and
Whoa.
then lost control, and so the axle was became that James Bond thing, and like tore
Yeah.
through 3 cars, including mine.
No.
So it's on one hand kind of astonishing and dramatic and
Yeah.
almost laughable, and on the other hand, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is my beautiful 18-year-old Prius that I've taken very good care of, and I just replaced the hybrid battery.
I know it just could vote too.
It could just vote,
Jeez.
and here I have to say goodbye, because insurance companies, it doesn't look good on paper. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, on the upside, I was about to move in with my now wife, who has a Honda CRV, gas only. It's a great car. As cars go, I mean, Toyotas and Hondas are super reliable. And but it felt like a step back, because I'm like, oh,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Impact wise.
like owning a hybrid, like one of the early hybrids. This was a 2005 Prius, so it was the second year of that generation of Prius. It was like a badge of honor. I mean, in the early days, I was the one who
Totally. Totally.
had the parking right next to like the expecting mothers, and
Yeah.
now that's electric cars. Like, I get it. We've moved on. Um, but it just was something. It made me feel good. It was a part of my identity, as
Sure.
attempting to do my tiny little part, not to make things worse. I feel like that's true of both of us. Maybe most humans. I don't know. Maybe that's
Yeah.
a little generous, but
My
in our
Prius
own
is
way,
my Prius is only 12 years old, but
there you go.
but yeah, same trajectory. It was the only new car I've ever bought in my life.
So all of that feeds into me really not liking when when I have to consume gasoline, and so-called fossil fuels
Yeah.
to drive 4 blocks to school when we could walk. Part of that's just the environmental impact, and then part of that's just actually missing the beauty of taking a walk in the morning.
Yeah. What a privilege. Yeah.
Um, and so that is our lead in today to
Mm.
talk about the question, is climate change real?
Mm.
Because if it weren't real, I guess I wouldn't care so much about the fact that I got downgraded to a gas only car or driving 4 blocks or
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so much of that impetus is built upon the uh, purported um, existential crisis that climate change offers us. And so I would say unjustly, which starts to already tip my hand, unjustly has foisted much of that responsibility onto the average citizen, which doesn't make rational sense, but it is enabling in terms of unity of purpose and the ability for like every little bit to make a difference, which I actually like. You know what I mean? That's like a fun. Who knows how realistic it is or not? Um, it's enlivening to be able to think that you can, through your meager efforts, combined with the meager efforts of, let's say, millions of other people, if not billions eventually, then you're like, oh, all together we can make, we can make a difference. Now, statistically, I don't know if that's even accurate because most of the carbon emission issues are industrial. So, this is like the thing of like, oh, we don't have plastic straws anymore. But there are many factories pumping, just dumping plastic and pumping, chemicals into water, which makes it reflect differently and changes I mean, like we've got a trash island the size of Texas, all that stuff, which is a group project. Let's be honest, we all contributed to that in some way or another. Um, but I still like it. It's very hard for me not to let go of it. Of like, can we be, can we make optimal ethical choices in all of our endeavors?
yeah.
So
Uh,
I like that too. Now, go to my preamble before we kind of start dissecting, is climate change real? Is probably the one that we already talked about offline, but well, technically online, but pre-record, is that the debate is often framed this way: is climate change real? And for anybody who's ever heard that or is like, oh, that person's a climate change denier, um, as far as I know, and I am one of those people who'd be considered, quote, too online, end quote. Uh, I don't see hardly anyone making the argument that climate change is not real. I think that is a vanishingly small, negligible, maybe even non-existent portion of the population. What people are arguing is what is causing climate change. Temperatures are raising. For a long time, we were worried about global cooling because temperatures were declining. And that was the environmental threat of like our early days, right? The first couple of decades of our life. Global cooling was the big paranoia. It was on the cover of Time magazine. I may be paraphrasing, but influential magazines had it on the cover. And this has been one of the caveats of people who were like, yeah, it's malarkey. It's just like, well, first it was cooling, now it's warming. Like, I don't believe anything you're saying. Um, the question is, how much of what is changing is our doing, therefore how much human beings, I mean, therefore how much of that can we actually change? Like, is climate, I mean, is climate changeable? um and have we changed it, or are we going through yet another cycle throughout history, the history of the planet? I mean, this is, most people zoom all the way out to have the conversation in terms of like all of known history, like have temperatures cycled up and down, and are we in that range? Because I think it's almost undeniable that temperatures are raising over the past whatever, in a post-industrial era. So there are certainly correlational data. There's correlational evidence to go, well, this might be the thing. We should pay attention. And so I'm glad people are talking about it, and people should be talking about it. Where it gains enmity, I think, is this whole thing of like, oh, you just deny, It's the same thing. It's like, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're an anti-masker, you're a blah. It gets into othering language very quickly. Oh, but sorry. So my preamble, in conclusion, I think my firm answer is I don't know. I have neither a strong pro or con position.
Well, and that's part of the frame for today. So
Yeah,
pretty rarely do we suggest a topic that neither of us have done a lot of research on.
yeah,
You are much more of a researcher than I am generally. We talk about that. And a lot of what we actually focus on here are perceptions because
yeah,
I don't know, perception is truth to some extent in the way of humanity and media.
yeah,
And and it at least guides, as we saw as we started this whole thing, like
yeah,
with the pandemic and the lockdowns, it guides major decisions and ways of moving through the world. So today we just thought, I suggested this topic because it's one I feel like we've thought about but never really prioritized.
yeah,
And it's also an exercise today mostly sharing our perceptions as we stand and
yeah,
just however we showed up today. And then since we are gonna um, take a little bit of time off, we're gonna have a month to test those perceptions and to do research. So the one of the goals of today is to kind of design, like, what would it look like
yeah,
for any of us to actually validate or invalidate some of these perceptions and to go deeper and to learn more, because that's also a big part of our goal here is to develop more muscles and more rigor around, like,
yeah, yeah.
what do we even stand for, particularly if we're going to be out there championing it or being involved in anything socially that might even lead to policy choices and all that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and maybe one of my first questions is, um, how do I phrase this? What is your perception generally um, of people who claim, people you encounter in your life, virtually or in real life, um, people who are either radically convinced that, oh, first question, are you surrounded by anybody who is radically convinced that human beings are negligibly responsible for climate change as it's currently trending? Like, do you have any what people would term falsely a climate change denier? Do you have any of those in your life or circle?
I don't think so. I'm sure I'm connected to a handful on Facebook, and maybe I see that sort of periodically.
Yeah.
Uh, my assumption and my bias is that sort of merged with a lot of conservative thinking, but I'm just the whole frame here is as perception. I'm like, I don't even know if that's true.
Yeah, yeah. I was just wondering because I think I have again, I don't know if it's at how even the mix is because I don't follow a ton of people who talk about it one way or another. Um, but I would say I'm slightly dominantly involved in my life with people who are like climate change is real and people are perhaps the primary cause. Um, and adjunct to that, how many people do you know who are talking about it who seem to be uh, in any way, what do you say? Well, in any way, like even moderately exhaustively informed about it, because that's something I don't see a lot of. I see a lot of people like just calling people climate change deniers or people who are like, we need to do this and that or whatever, but I hardly ever see them present any evidence that they have a founded position. And so that's one of the things that's always made me slightly skeptical about it is like, um, I don't see all I see is you putting up anecdotal or correlational data or evidence or whatever, or an article of someone just saying it's a problem. So it's like, okay, well, that person thinks it's a problem. My presupposition, or I wouldn't say my presupposition, my supposition based on information at this point, or perception and information, um, is that most people who are very like knee-jerk activated about it, who I encounter in my regular life, virtual and real, um, actually have no idea what they're talking about and have no basis for enmity to anyone to believe anything else. That's my perception. I don't know if you have the same perception, but I wanted to like lay that layer of perception out.
Yeah. So is the question, no matter what somebody's position, do they seem to ever back it up with evidence?
Yes. Or
Well,
is it,
it's something
yeah,
that
go ahead.
seems to flare up,
Yeah.
like a lot of these things. And we talked about that. Like there's like
Yes.
a rotation. It's
Yeah.
really, we could make a one of those wheels and
You
just go.
could spin it. Yeah. Tick, 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 tick,
Um,
tick, 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 tick.
it's like it's
Yeah.
Earth Day. I remember in the 80s, the first
Yeah.
Earth Day that I
Yeah.
cared about. I thought it was the first one, but I think it started in the 70s or even earlier.
Yeah.
Um, and it was a big one. It was like Bette Midler, and they roll out all these stars, and I was like, and in the 80s we were learning about chlorofluorocarbons and the
Yeah.
hole in the ozone, and I don't know. Apparently we fixed that, so it sort of seemed
That's
like
that's great. I remember they blamed hairspray at the time. It was the 80s. But I remember hairspray was like a big thing. It's like hairspray is really bad for the ozone layer. It
and
was
I
like,
was actually talking
okay.
about my wife earlier today about it. It's at some level, I'll get back to the question, but at some level, there's a piece of this that's like, well, whatever we believe, I mean, surely just throwing less crap into the world and the air that we breathe, it's like that must be good, right? So there's like
Yeah.
an element to me of like, yeah, where I think we're asking like, well, what is the motivation for humans to just pollute less? Like that's some
Yes.
piece of
Yes.
this.
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
that's a good area to bring up too. I think that's an area of almost universal agreement for almost anyone you'd encounter. Have we trashed the earth? No, almost nobody is going to disagree. Now, people, of course, have different perceptions about what regulations should be, how to process that issue. That's a separate conversation. But there is often assumptions. It's like, you don't care about the earth. Or like, oh my gosh, you're obsessed with the flipping earth. Like, what about people? Or, whatever, right? What about what
well,
about what about economic devastation? What about downstream, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, no, no. Again, I don't know anybody, and I certainly am not someone who's like, we shouldn't trash the earth. And this is one of the areas too that I think environmental activism and like climate change activism have sometimes gotten intermingled in a way that doesn't actually make any sense because they're different categories of study. Because so much about climate change, I would say, and its negative output is alarmism. Climate change alarmism seems to be the accusation I do see quite a bit. Is we it's predictive, meaning it's most of the data seems to be, or the concern seems to be based on modeling studies. So that's where you input information based on trajectory. Listen, it's data based, but it is a predictive to where you have to choose what goes in the model and what doesn't. Whereas we can measurably witness in a scientific fashion, in the classic scientific fashion of observation, repetition, confirmation, all that sort of stuff, with environmental impact, meaning the Texas size garbage thing keeps growing. So we can watch that literally, like that has happened and it wasn't there before. And we have no evidence that like plastics were in the, like that type of plastics and trash was in the ocean prior to humans putting it there. Um, so then, yeah, I would say most people are actually kind of on board, especially I would say across the political spectrum, in like protecting our natural resources. And that means not just in terms of like hauling stuff out of the ground, but that differs, of course, from across the partisan spectrum. But in terms of, for Republicans, it might be like preserving national parks or something. You know what I mean? Whatever. And and then it it exists everywhere. Everyone is like, we're not being good stewards of creation. Um, I would say almost for sure. Like that is, again, that's a vanishingly rare difference. Well, except for my one theory that the earth has actually fostered our development in order to create plastics because the earth is addicted to plastic, like a junkie is addicted to heroin, and it's just been waiting this whole time. And that's why it's going to wipe us off space of the earth, because it already has enough plastic to get high on for a long, long time. I anthropomorphize the earth in that sense. That's my one. It is more of a poetic, imaginative, fictional scenario, folks. But if that's true, then we're actually doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, which is filling the earth with enough trash to make it feel high.
Now that is a theory I haven't heard.
Okay, good, good. I'm trying to, yeah, if nothing else, my theories better be novel.
So do you remember this movie Biodome with Pauly Shore?
Heck yeah. I think
Heck
it was
yeah.
Tenacious. I think it was Tenacious D's like first like appearance in like a broadcast anything, as I
Oh,
recall.
I
So
forgot that.
for
Oh
me,
my God.
it holds that special space.
Whoa, whoa.
Deep cut, baby.
So a silly movie in most regards, and yet it had this sort of profound message that I hold that the Earth is more resilient than we know.
Hmm.
It was like this perfect biodome, and all the scientists and everything was like supposed to be this perfect experiment, and then
Yeah.
Pauly Shore and his friends show up and trash everything. And then at the end of the movie, it's like, let's clean it up, dude. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
as an aside, we're also watching Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with my stepdaughter, which is delightful. Um, and I say we're watching because it takes about 3 or 4 days to get through a whole movie.
No. Oh no. That's a whole
Uh,
nother episode, man. Have we destroyed our attention spans? I think so. I don't know. The anecdotal evidence is pretty strong.
um, I think it's maybe it's that. I think it's more time management. It's just like, oh, how do we only have 30 minutes before we need to get ready for bed and all the things.
Yeah, yeah.
But anywho, um, so yeah, I also you kind of hinted at this, but it's like people talk about saving the earth, and I always correct them. I'm like, nah, you're talking about saving the humans, and
Yeah.
then
Earth's
we're
probably gonna be fine.
should be fine. It's good.
Yeah. How many scars are we leaving upon it, really? Is a good question.
All right, so to come back to a question you asked earlier,
Yeah.
what's my perception of folks who, whatever their position is, are they providing evidence, or as you mentioned at one point, is it a tribal signifier? Um, I it's a darn good question because the reality is, even if they are posting an article, I'm not going deep into it, and so
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, whenever it sort of spikes or it's just hot for one person, or they just are passing on something that happens to float through, um, there seem to be a handful of arguments. People refer to, I think, studies, but again, I haven't even dug in deep enough to know if they are,
Yeah.
but sort of, and I couldn't even tell you what they are right in this moment, but I'm
Yeah.
rattling around somewhere is like, oh yeah, there's some big study, it's like 2030 or 2027. There's some tipping point, there's some moment when it's like too late. And I'm like, wait a minute, I think I saw one post that said we're already too late, and it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
we can do now is just sort of like triage. And then I'm like, honestly, if it's already too late, then I just want to party the rest of the way and forget about everything.
Yeah. That's the danger of those deadlines. Yeah.
But then I also think the Earth is so much more complex than any model or any person can possibly comprehend. I mean, maybe AI will change that. I think our computational capacity is about to
Hmm.
it's increasing like
Yeah.
exponentially. So it's like that might be good. Maybe we can actually finally have realistic models. And yet I don't know what I'm talking about. And so
Yeah.
that's this is why this topic is so germane to our general theme, because it's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many of the things we discuss probably most people don't have a ton of actual evidence or expertise in.
Yeah.
And yet there are people, particularly hardcore, like progressive friends that often correlate with social justice and woke stuff, are just like unchangeable, unwavering, just like it's
Yeah.
real. Here's the deadline that's signed off by the whatever huge global organization, and that's that.
Yeah. 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 And I think to me that's one of the things I do regularly. So this sort of speaks to like patterns of confirmation. The way I often my layer one is often to just like go check out arguments for anything and against anything and look at what those arguments are based on. And then basically look at the strength of the argument, even absent evidence. Like evidence types is factor in, but I just go look and go, are these people reliable and are they making an argument that makes rational sense? I have come to, and I didn't have this prior to maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I had the opposite perception. I've come to sort of look at that those uh, on the like amongst the progressive cohort are not particularly reliable. Maybe even I would state are sort of unreliable when it comes to sort of science-based evaluation, and that the tendency, it seems, amongst said cohort is to cleave to the lowest form of scientific evidence, which is expert opinion or expert consensus even. So the consensus of experts is scientifically the lowest form of scientific evidence. It is evidence, but it seems to be, there seems to be like a radical, statistically even, a statistically radical adherence to what this group said is real. How dare you contradict this group? That is a terrible argument I mean, for just about anything. It's, and listen, sometimes that's all we have. We have more than that, though, of course, in any case of anything to do with like scientific theory or um, the evaluation of actual evidence, that sort of thing. So I have become extremely skeptical now, just based on, oh, here's another thing in the same arena. I want to check everything out individually. I feel like that's appropriate. But my immediate tendency is, since I watched all my friends on the left get mRNA vaccination consequences completely wrong, or not completely wrong, but just like tilted disproportionately towards a non-evidence-based evaluation system. Same thing with masks. Same thing with the idea of evaluating like gender. That I'm like, oh, you're proposing sort of radical ways of evaluating, and I think that's part of the project. We've talked about that before. To actually, that there is an anti-science in its classic sense. There's an anti-science ethos informing the activism or the conclusions. And I remember, I think I talked about, I don't know if I talked about this on the show, but I've mentioned this for some reason. So I remember watching the John Kerry in debate with, what did Kerry run against? Bush, maybe was it George W. in the first time around, maybe? Anyway, he was the presidential candidate. They were in a debate, and Kerry had obviously been told by his handlers to like make sure you end all of your things with like kind of a good statement, like a nice little sound bite. My dad had done his senatorial campaign as a like political advisor, like commercial maker. He worked in comms, I guess. So I was more interested in this presidential run than I was in a bunch of other ones. Paid very little attention after that. But I watched this whole debate, and at one point he was, adamantly talking about something. And at the end of it, he says, "And we are the party of science." It was not quite a non sequitur, but it was awkward and weird. And I was like, "Oh, that's funny to like watch someone like read a line that they had pre-thought, in their own brain." And so for years, that made an impact on me, though. I was like, well, that probably is true then. That's a principle that he thinks is true and he wants to get across. I feel like in the past 4 years or so, I was like, John Kerry, maybe he wasn't wrong, but he is wrong now. It's just simply not, I don't think it's part of the framework. I think actually progressive specifically, but the left in general is actually in a what's the word? They are in a mission of radical change, of let's alternate ways of knowing. Let's stop centralizing things like the scientific method, Enlightenment reasoning. This comes from critical theory, right? We've talked about on here that's it's. So I think that's what's happening. So then when it comes to like evaluation and science stuff, it seems that cohort is less trustworthy. So that's the thing. That's sort of a like a bias over time thing. I had to break my previous bias, but over time I was just like, well, there's just too much evidence for me to just be like, well, you haven't been trustworthy on anything else scientific, so that makes you less. Let me frame it from my own brain. That makes you a less trustworthy transmitter of perspective. However, you always have to go to the second layer in terms of analysis and go, well, is their argument terrible, but did they just basically misapprehend the data available? Meaning they could still be right, but they just literally don't know why they're right. They're wrong. Like they're wrong about why they're right, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the start of my methodology generally that I'll probably engage in over the next month. And that probably tilts my bias too towards, I don't know how much humans are involved. It would be weird to me if they weren't involved at all, especially post-industrialization. And because we have done so much trash, like obvious trashing of the environment. But are they the primary drivers of the change? I mean, don't know. And when I read the evidence, which I've only read maybe 2, 3, like modeling studies, I'm like, I don't know. So I see graphs online, right? A lot of times you're like, here, this is from 19, like whatever, the 1600s till now. Tick, 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 tick. It's going up the ladder. And then I see other people post a graph and they're like, well, if you zoom out 6,000 years, you'll notice it goes up and then it comes back down. It goes up, but it comes back down. And I'm like, I don't know. Both those graphs can coexist. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think the if I've heard any trace of an argument for climate change denial, it's that
Yeah.
it's like people don't trust that humanity has even the ability to make that impact.
Yeah.
And I think this reminds me of that movie Don't Look Up, which I thought was a great movie. And
Yeah.
there's because it weaves in so much of this stuff that we're fascinated
Yeah.
to hear about media and who do you trust in government and but the thing that's the same is, in that they would think it was a huge comet or
Yeah.
meteor
Meteor, I think maybe. Yeah.
that was coming, and you could see it through a telescope, and that's theoretically more obvious. And there were people who looked through the telescope
Yes.
and actually saw it and were still like, man, maybe it's not a big deal. And
Yeah.
and then with the climate change, it's you know even if one of we maybe we'll both reveal that, like, gosh, yeah, like it's pretty conclusive evidence that humans have accelerated this thing
Yeah.
that looks
We're killing
pretty,
ourselves.
pretty dangerous. Oh yeah, we we love the self-harm. Um, Even if it were uh, just conclusive that we were doing that, and
Yeah.
that it was causing a horrible situation, an existential crisis even, how do you convince billions of people that that's true
Yeah.
in this day and age, which is some pretty much probably the theme we come back to the most, is like, what
Yeah.
is truth, and how in the world do you convince anybody of a collective truth, but particularly if it's actually an existential crisis for all of us.
Yeah. It's very difficult. Well, because it confronts not only the sort of evidence at hand, but it, especially when evidence is predictive, or again, I find modeling like, okay, so I've read hundreds, whatever, well over 100, probably over 150 at this point, like studies on masking. Other than the ones that are kind of modeling based, uh, it's not impossible for anybody to understand with just autodidact time put in. The the number of data point inputs and trying to ascertain, like, wait, what do you mean? How did you put that in? You gave it what weight of modeling studies, especially when it comes to environmental stuff? I don't, I'll freely admit, I don't get it. I had a friend who was in my Bible study, James, who was a PhD student. He got his doctorate, and he was working on modeling studies based on satellite uh, information. So that was like his thesis was about specifically about satellite data collection related to environmental impact in use for modeling studies. It wasn't about climate change necessarily. It was other types of, it was about air pollutants for other causes or whatever outcomes. But in talking to him, and I like learning about new stuff, like 20 minutes in, you're glazing over. I'm like, okay, wait. So, um, okay, so then who who decides that has that percentage? Like, why did you give it that particular weight in that model? And then why is he's like, well, and some modeling things are based on previous models as well. So then it is, I understand why people are like confused about it. Makes sense to me. I find it confusing. Um, but it's also why I don't have a strong opinion on it. And so I'm skeptical of people who have a strong opinion on it without understanding the evidence. And again, this is maybe a little bit ego, where it's like, oh, I don't understand it. Like, how can you understand it? So I have to always watch that bias within myself.
Is,
Secondly, though,
is that not
go.
the primary reason, though, that folks tend to lean towards this expert opinion category, where
Yeah,
it's
because they
like,
don't
oh,
want
this
to, yeah.
person has studied this for 40 years and they have all the degrees and blah, blah, blah. Might they know? Might they actually have a clue?
Yeah. But then you get, it's kind of, it reminds, this is what I didn't know this prior to the pandemic response, but I was like, well, what you end up doing with that, I was like, oh, it's like watching kaiju fight. You basically then like, that's my favorite kaiju. It's like a fighting game. Here's my expert who says this, and he has these degrees from this university. And you're like, okay, well, here's my expert from this university who says this thing. And then you basically like watch kaiju fight on the horizon, and you're like, eventually mine's gonna win. Like it's
That much is true. You can pretty much
yeah,
find anybody to back up anything,
yeah,
and
who has a
probably even
degree.
a study of some kind. But
Yeah.
that's my bias, and I'm like, oh, is that true? Because Brendan's always reminding me to go find actual studies, and how rarely do any of us do that.
Yeah, and that's what, and to me, that's like why I was like, I'm going to deep dive on masks because I found people being dishonest about it. I was like, oh, well, that's people like NPR made a like a factually inaccurate statement, and that shook my worldview in April of 2020. And I was like, okay, I'm going to read everything I can possibly find. I'm going to read every systematic survey I can possibly find, and then I'm going to read all this, literally every single study that they reference to at least be like, okay, how is this? Why is this happening? What's going on? So, and at that point, I mean, I started expressing an opinion of like, oh, this is unusual. And if, a year later, hundreds, 100+ studies, a year later, I was like, okay, now I have a position. Now I have a basis to have a strong position. And at that point, I had already argued it out with 100 some odd people, and I'd researched it heavily. And I was like, okay, I kind of know the holes in my game and fix those, change my mind slightly over and over again. Whereas again, with climate change, like I have no idea. So anyone I see adamant about it, I'm just like, what can you, how do you validate which experts are expert? Because you're not an expert in expert evaluation. I'm not an expert in expert evaluation. So then basically are you then trusting other sources to be your expert evaluators, and then you trust the expert as to their evaluation. You're just getting farther and farther away from like knowing what you're actually talking about.
Hmm.
And we live in an age of information where there's no excuse for that. I mean, I see unhoused people at the library. Sometimes if I have to go to the library like a couple times a day for whatever reason, the same person's often there on the computer. As long as no one's waiting for your computer, you can keep using it. You can re-up your time, at least at our local library, which is right near a bus station. So there's a lot of vagrant population there. So people have the time. Uh, you can look at everyone's like average Netflix hours or look at your phone usage. We all have the time. We have the access to this in a way that we've never had throughout human history. And so I don't, that's the part that drives me a little bit crazy. Oh, and then secondly, let me just introduce the next thing. You can respond to anything, but like my next level is what I am more convinced of is has uh, the climate change reality been weaponized in order to control populations or to advance authoritarianism? And on that point, I've seen more than enough evidence that I'm like, yes, it has. Now, of course, that's the second. You can argue that point too separately as, but is that what we need to do? Because again, you asked a great question, like how do you convince everyone? And at some point, people, if it is an existential crisis, you run out of time, right? This is like bringing Georgia. You got 10 minutes left. You run out of time for negotiation where you're like, well, we can't. And now we just have to force you to do this thing. So again, you have a justification for it, but it is happening. Like, and generally speaking, it seems to the the mass amount of harm of that always seems to fall on those who are already most marginalized. So I'm very skeptical of that. I'm very skeptical of handing social control over people who haven't proven their case or don't have a good argument. So it's sort of an adjunct issue, but it is related. Um,
So and this is so interesting to noodle on my approach.
yeah,
So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to Google climate change.
nice.
And there's already immediately 10 problems with that, right? Given Google's limited access to information and bias and et cetera. But
Yeah,
it'll at least, I'm sure, pull up some articles. I assume they'll be in fairly mainstream publications. But I want to find some articles for and against.
yeah,
Just as
yeah,
a starting point. It's like
yeah,
that's seems reasonable enough. And then, like I said, I feel like with this topic in particular, there are big movements and like branded sort of
yeah,
movements, studies,
yeah,
whatever. I want to look into those because I think there's something important happening there,
yeah,
in a lot of cases, hopefully, they have actually, I think some of them have created whole websites and portals, with all of this information and,
Yep.
links to
Yep.
studies and all this stuff. So,
Absolutely.
and I mean, my God, there must be thousands of hours on YouTube, etc.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think X is actually a great, it's one of the things I love about X is a great resource for subject-based exploration
mm,
because the ability to like link and then the ability to scroll down and look at like, listen, 5, 12 to 15 of the retorts are going to be evidence-based, sharing their own links. I think that's one of the easy. I found X so helpful in
yeah,
terms of like, here's my opinion. Oh yeah, here's the study I like.
right.
Okay, here's 3 studies that say that's I was like, that's the most convincing methodology to me. So that's the methodology I engage in with people,
Yeah.
which is
There's
like,
all
oh,
the
here's
research laid right out.
yeah. So at least you can like to me, I found it a great place to get started. I started following a guy. I don't follow that many people who kind of talk about climate change all that often, but Bjorn Lomborg is someone who talks about it from it as an expert opinion. Um, and I think even just absorbing his material has informed my present bias, which is things are happening. We don't know how involved we are. Um, and people are using it to do as an excuse to do terrible things. And again, that convinces me, A, because I just watched it happen for the past like 4 to 6 years. People are like, here's what's real. How do you know that's real? Well, this person said, okay, well, science says to listen to this. Here's what that says. That's not true. I'm listening to these people, and then do terrible things to fellow human beings. So I've watched that pattern. So it's like easier for me to believe that this is in that pattern ahead of time. Whether or not it's true or not, I always try to hold lightly that I'm wrong because I really enjoy changing my mind, even if sometimes that's a modification of degrees. You know what I mean? Like I've changed my mind 8% today. That's a good day. You know?
Right. Well, and then so I think that the other two for me, so I put try to read a study. I mean, to your point, it's like I don't know if I'm
Yeah,
qualified to really. I mean, I can obviously read a study, but will I really understand it? Will I really get much out of it? Will it, to your point, will it impact my way of thinking?
yeah,
Um, but it's telling in and of itself, right? Of just, I remember even when we were talking about abortion, I was like, oh, that's the first time I've like read a Princeton or like study on like when conception begins, and I learned a
yeah,
ton.
yeah.
It helped inform, and it also helped inform what I know, what I think I know, and what I definitely don't know. You know,
Yes, it's
That's,
always helpful. Yeah,
I'm
this
not a
is the
biologist, so it's like, oh,
yeah,
this is getting into stuff, terminology nobody really ever mentions.
yeah.
Uh, and then I do want to ask a friend who's deeper into this than me.
That's helpful.
I have a number of friends. I have at least one friend I can think of in particular who like is a brilliant, thinker and writer, and I think got a PhD in environmental studies. And so that's intriguing. I have a lot of people I know in what we generally call like the regenerative movement. And
Yeah,
interestingly enough, the tone there is a little different than the progressives. Like the regenerative people, sometimes they get their back up and are kind of pokey and guilt guilt driving. But
sure.
for the most part, it actually seems way more rooted in like just how can we live with the earth better? How can we honor our resources and build
Yeah, yeah,
circular economies? And I'm like, cool, that's pretty groovy.
yeah.
So there, some of them, I assume, have access to information about what's really happening with our mother Gaia. Um, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's my those are my thoughts for how I will approach this.
As a non sequitur, maybe even more non sequitur than biodome. Just
Whoa. All right.
how dare you? No, listen, because it tethers, but I'm leaping. And so I was curious, like, okay, so this is just a political side note, and I was like, oh, I wanted to ask you about this anyway. So RFK Jr. Ran for president, tried to run as a Democrat. The Democrats pretty much forced him out, and then have been attacking him with lawfare for the past year or whatever. But then he dropped out of some states and actually kind of endorsed Donald Trump in those states in order to basically essentially get maybe a cabinet position, or certainly he's part of the transition team, and to get influence in terms of the areas, specifically the areas of um, food health, children's health, essentially, children's health and censorship. So supposedly he's going to have some position that now allows him to influence in those areas. Um, in the regenerative type folks, which I think is a cohort that we share in common, of like a notable number of people who I would consider absolutely in that world. They
Mhm.
spread across the political spectrum.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. And
yeah,
sometimes people make the assumption they're progressives, and like it's funny
no,
when people do that. I'm
yeah,
like, no, that's not. You should never assume.
no, they're almost. I mean, if you look at the instead of looking at the political spectrum as a line, if you look at it as a circle, I feel like they're literally that circle place that connects the two. So it's really kind of outside of
Mm-hmm.
both, and it's
Yeah.
consistent. It's like the Ron Paul fans. But like, so did you amongst that cohort? Was that cohort super into RFK Jr.? Because at least in my section of that chunk of folks, like RFK has been like people's in some people's dream candidate almost,
Mm.
because of his focus on uh whatever, everything from regenerative farming to environmental steward. I mean, he's an environmental lawyer, so like environmental stewardship, as well as skepticism of big ag, uh big pharma, big food, like all those touchstones for that whole the regenerative section. um like, have you noticed that politically? I've been fascinated over the past couple of weeks, so I've kind of been like, um, it's been wild to watch the reaction uh, to that whole maneuver. Anyway, have you had you seen them involved in the political space, or are they kind of apolitical and they're like, leave us alone, we're just going to fix the world on our own?
I really don't know. I don't think I have enough
Okay,
meaningful conversations directly with them to answer that, and I don't see Facebook is probably my biggest portal for that. And I just don't
yeah.
see many of them posting about anything political in
Oh,
terms.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like
But
those people too.
in terms of presidential politics, you could argue it's all political. But yeah, I mean
Yeah,
specifically
sure. Yeah, the person.
electoral politics. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. No, that's a good division of category. Um, so asking people, if I had to guess your first thing, I was like, but I always think of you as like a very networked guy. So I'm always like, well, you've got someone to like go talk to start to launch your investigation with, which I think is always cool. And so I'm fascinated to hear about like who you talk to, and well, especially my whole thing. I love to go to people who are way more informed on something than me. I'm always like, can you send me like what's the most convincing stuff, and what's the most convincing stuff of the opposite thesis? Because
Yeah.
that like save, can you get me started on both avenues? Because I feel like this is the like the scientific method bred again. This is my bias, being raised in the West, being raised in the United States of America, that like the scientific method is uh eminently valuable for looking at causation. Like that's I certainly have that bias. Um, and I've been thinking about like the the higher value that the left places on oral tradition, which I think is undervalued uh, slightly on the right, um, which I think is a misstep. Um, but I've often wondered, like, is it that reliance on the oral tradition, or even the elevation of oral tradition, to be as relevant as, let's say, the Enlightenment tradition of scientific reasoning or whatever? Um, Often makes me go, okay, well, is my knee jerk, is my bias of dismissal based on my bias for the scientific method in these particular arenas? Do you notice that have you noticed that bias as well? Do you think the bias exists, or if I just is that as radical as my the earth is a crack hoe that created us to give her plastic crack?
The bias of the left being more about oral tradition.
Yeah, or being less interested in, yeah, more interested in the oral tradition and basically what people say than here's what we've found and here's what we can reproduce. Like that sort of like that kind of analysis by the scientific method, or like anything that came out of the Enlightenment, you know?
Yeah, I think that's true in a few ways. I mean, in the more radical spaces on the left, that we've talked about quite a bit. I would say that there's an explicit rejection
Yeah.
It's even correlated with so-called white supremacy culture.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
That,
right. I hadn't
right.
thought about that. Yeah, yeah.
So white supremacy culture, in some ways, is just another way of saying Enlightenment reasoning, which I don't know. I think a bunch of white dudes came up with the Enlightenment, so I get it. Um, and I do try to be careful casting such a wide net, but I do believe and understand that a lot of indigenous cultures were also based on oral traditions and weren't necessarily,
Yeah.
not that they didn't have any means to write, but they weren't writing like huge legal contracts as we tend to do.
Yeah.
And yet, I also understand that we borrowed or outright stole a lot of the founding, ideas and that did become written documents and like the Constitution.
Yes.
So that's part of it. The other correlation that I keep coming back to in this conversation that's possible is I perceive the left to be far more needy about belonging and socialization.
Yes.
And that would seem hand in hand with talking to each other. And
Yes.
I'm not necessarily saying all that talk is constructive, but that just it's human nature to build our relationships on talking out loud to each other.
Yeah, that was my previous bias. I think I'm slowly surrendering it. Just having when I talk to people on the left online at least, um, people don't want to talk. I just had that experience with someone on the right this week as well. It's not an only it's not an only problem. Um, but the the good part of that is talking to people, being in community. That is so valuable. I actually think it's one of the reasons that cohort on the left exists, and that is vital. Like no one should be abolishing the left or the right. Like we kind of need all those different people types, so they have a better sense of community. And then I guess the flip side of that becomes the insularity aspect, where then you're very it's a high it's a high policing society, tone policing, content policing, perspective policing, um, whatever. Like the roots of cancel culture certainly like came up in our culture through the left. I think the right does it as well. Um, but that's like its origins become that. And I wonder too if that's actually some of the one of the benefits of colonization. That's right, bring that up again. Um, is that insularity for most, not all, but most indigenous cultures was a fundamental aspect of life, meaning many tribes, many insular peoples viewed anybody from outside as outsider, dangerous, and or at least kind of different rules. There are different rules for how you have to behave with people outside. And so in some ways, like outsiders coming in and dominating proves the theory. And in other ways, outside eventually integrating out of that colonial element led to a broader sense of like, okay, well, everybody, this sort of egalitarian, again, this is like kind of a very fundamentally Christian thing. So again, that's also my bias as a Christian, is like this egalitarian sense of like, oh, all people are made in the image of God. Therefore, all people are, whether inside our tribe or outside our tribe, are at the very least in face value, we should be like ready to accept them as much us as like a them thing. I don't know
Yeah.
if you see it as well. It's part of the same thing. So, but I only mention that because I think it factors into any evaluative aspect that someone deep in community gets involved in. If they're high in politeness or conscientiousness, right? Like I'm high in polite. I did like a pretty comprehensive personality test, and I'm high in conscientiousness, like above average, but I'm like drastically low in politeness. So like in some ways it's one of the reasons I think I have difficulty, and I've always had some difficulty functioning um in leftist cohorts, even though that's been my whole life or whatever, is because politeness, that idea of group cohesion, I think sometimes is more valued than like proper orientation, if that makes sense. Again, it's more feminine. It's more of a, I believe a woman's role in the world is partially is cohesion based, and I think the man's role, even more, this has to do more with like mother and father, but the man's role is more directional than cohesional. So meaning it's like, what way do we have to go? Figure that out. How do we keep us all together? That's her job. Together, that makes a fantastic package because then you can go places and you can go places together, which is, I think, I mean, that's the yeah, that's even theoretically what politics is all about, right? Or any of these issues is like, how do we know we're going the right way? Let's figure that out together, and then let's all go there together.
Yeah. Well, a couple of points I'll pick up. One is, I think I used the word needy referring to the left, and I'm like, huh, why did I choose that word? Because fundamentally, we all we're a social
I,
species. We need each
I'm
other,
needy. Yeah.
you know. So, and yet, I think I chose that word because I do think the left's approach often is a bit shadowy in the sense that, like you said, it often, I think, shows up as cancel culture and gossip and just, I don't know, there's just like a funk there, that needs to be healed and addressed. Uh,
Yeah.
and whatever, the right has its own other challenges.
Yeah.
But I do believe, and I think I've mentioned this before. I mean, I would one of my fundamental beliefs is that our the human need for belonging and our fear of being kicked out of the tribe
Yeah.
is, if you go deep enough, that is at the root of so many other behaviors and motivations and
Yeah.
ways we show up or don't show up for each other.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I agree. I think, to me, it is a feminine energy. I've I've done assessments that say I carry a lot of feminine energy, so that all lines up. I'd be curious if I did
Yeah.
that exact assessment you just mentioned, I might
Yeah.
get really high politeness. In fact, just yesterday I was talking
Yeah.
to a collaborator, and she was saying, please tell me directly. Like, I can take criticism, I can take heat.
Yeah.
I'd
Yeah.
rather get it direct because I'm actually not good at reading between the lines.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
people refer this as being kind versus nice, and it's a
Yeah.
growth for me to
Yeah.
show up and be that direct. And it's this huge limitation of politeness where I'm like,
Yeah.
I guess it's really, I think, again, going back, it's really deep down, like my fear of you
Mhm.
not liking me and rejecting me, and therefore that expanding into me probably being kicked out of the tribe.
Yeah. And then dying.
Yet,
Yeah.
and dying, right?
Yeah.
That, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the follow.
Yeah.
And yet it's counterproductive
Yes.
because
Yeah.
it means we're not going to have the strongest relationship or bond that we could if we were more
Yeah.
honest with each other.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think, I mean, just to highlight the flaw on the corollary flaw on the right is, do we have to listen to everybody? There is an analytical um there's a what's the word? Listen, extremists in the right can fall into the same thing of like, you're not with us. But I don't think I don't think it affects the general population quite as much as on the left, again, because I think they're just not as um what is it? Not as stridently compassionate in their feelings. They're more compassionate in their actions. So then the difficulty becomes like just not even really wanting to like listen to people. And not even and it more becomes like just like not taking the time to do it. Which again, as I've said before, I'm going to keep saying it until someone takes this on as a political platform. I think our system is already like, it's weirdly designed, but if we're going to stick to this like two-party thing, I actually think the Democrats should be in more dominant charge than Republicans of identifying problems. And I think the Republicans should be more dominant than Democrats in uh, figuring out how to solve those problems. That's my,
Wouldn't that be an interesting way to organize our politics?
yeah.
Well, what's the difference between what you just said, where the right doesn't want to listen to people, and cancel culture?
Cancel culture says you're kicked out. Like cancel culture to me is the phenomenon of like, you're not one of us. I think Republicans default to like, we don't, we don't even need to have this conversation.
Right. I'm not going to kick you out, but I
No,
really don't want to hear anything.
yeah, you can complain all you want. We're not going to shut you up. The shutting up is happening more and more, but it's still like the right is, we're seeing the right be like leagues behind the left on that realm. But in general, they're just also like, hey, we're doing this. You know what I mean? We're
Yeah.
putting the 10 Commandments on the wall. Oh yeah, did you talk to anybody about that? Did you? No, we're doing this. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
strong assertive action, leadership, need it. Vital. Most people, again, are too, let's see, some people can't do any of the analysis necessary. This is the thing I'm coming to realize, and like it's helping me be more compassionate as opposed to dismissive of anyone's humanity. I don't think dumb people aren't valuable humans. People with low IQ or people, what is it, like 57%? I just read. I checked it on like 3 or 4 sources, but something around 50 something, maybe 57, 58% of the US population reads at a 6th grade level or below. Now, that's just one form of transmission of information. I do think reading or literacy is highly valuable in that it requires layers of thinking that are helpful for critical thought, IQ, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. So knowing we have enough low IQ people who then don't rapidly process evaluative information, or people who can't read, which means they're limited in their ability to access information and process information. So they've fallen way behind the rest of the population, and that's half the population. Those people are still valuable. I think they should vote. Like, I'm not an IQ vote person. However, offending them or like pissing them off or even like having to check in with them forever doesn't make rational sense. So I almost understand the more Republican right thing of just like, let's just go. Again, a little bit, it's like people are idiots. Some people, or let's say some people are idiots. Maybe half the people are idiots. Again, don't kill them, don't hurt them. They deserve equal protection under the law. I love them. They're made in the image of God. They're there to teach us about ourselves. And they might be monumentally more valuable than anybody who's high IQ and can read at a alien level. On the left, however, I feel like it's often then they fall into the opposite flaw, which is everyone's perspective is equally valuable on everything, which is like, then that would take forever, and that's not accurate. Like, my perspective on climate change is not as valuable as Bjorn Lomborg or your friend, right? It isn't. It simply isn't. And that's okay. Like, that's fine. Again, I'm not here to be an expert in everything. No one is. But that's an interesting like set of biases I realize I have to confront as I pursue this next month of like looking at evidence and looking where the evidence has come from and looking at to some degree, the historical track record of being accurate as to evaluation, which is pretty fascinating to me. It's one of the things I engage in online quite a bit, maybe too much even, which is calling out people who are falsely representing things or lying. I was like, this person's lying. And here's 6 things that show they either said something else previously, or here's evidence to show that what they're talking about is not true. So they're either lying about what they know because they know they don't know it because it contradicts all available evidence, or blah blah blah. Like, so I think that is a very valuable thing because it's basically a way to do a little bit of the right type thing, which is like, oh, those are the voices I don't need to listen to on these particular subjects. They may have other great things to offer. I'm still going to watch every time they share a video of someone singing in public and blowing everyone away. You know what I mean? They're still valuable in all sorts of other ways, positive, negative, whatever.
Yeah.
But I just realized that's a dominant bias that I'm going to have to wrestle with this month.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And hey, for a topic that neither of us seem to know much about and have yet to research, we found lots to talk about. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And
How
so
are we
let's have
doing?
a
How are we doing? Is climate change real? In not the pop way, but what's our presupposition now before we head into a month of research? Meaning, like, is climate change, I would just say, is climate change dominantly caused by humans? I'm just going to go no, thinking, I'm just guessing you might go yes. I don't know if that's the case at all, but I'm going to go, I'm going to go no, just to add some friction.
I am a soft yes.
Okay.
I can't leave my progressive bias behind easily. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, cool. That's a good start.
Plus
I,
there's just the attitude I generally hold of like, well, it seems like a safer calculus to assume it's true and just try to do better.
yeah, isn't that a nice thing? All right. I mean, listen, like you were going back to your Prius thing. That's one of the great benefits of these considerations in general is like paying attention is a form of worship, worthship, right? You're giving your attention to a thing, which means anything you worship will change you. Now, of course, you have to be careful what you're worshiping, but if you're what you're putting your worthship towards is uh what's it, appropriate usage of the planet, or in a Christian perspective, like man was given dominion over the earth, appropriate execution of dominion. Because
Mhm.
if you're in dominion, if you're a king, you are eminent. You're all of a sudden you're real responsible. So if you don't examine these things, it's way easier to just be irresponsible in a number of choices. So it's pretty great. That's a great positive impetus, man, that I greatly appreciate you highlighting.
Beautiful. Well,
Beautiful.
let's reconvene and with all the answers.
Yeah, we'll fix everything. Don't worry about
You're welcome.
it. Exactly.
Love you.
Love you, man.